Coming up, in Washington, the legislature wrapped up its session last month. We catch up with Nez Perce Senator Claudia Kauffman about her work there. Plus, we have financial literacy tailored to Indigenous communities. And on this week's IndigiPolitics, we get the latest updates on tribal gaming. Join us for those interviews, plus headlines on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Lily Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amidawa Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. We turn first to South Carolina, where the Kataba Nation is celebrating the return this year of some ancestral land. Stuart Huntington has more for us.
The state of South Carolina has returned 32 acres of homeland to the Kataba Nation, but not without a prod. It began with a piece of so-called surplus state land.
And they told us that they were going to make sure that we had access to that piece of property whenever we needed it. And I thought, that's not good enough, So I said, well, I'd rather have the property. And they said, oh, we never thought about that. And then they came back on and they said, I think that's doable. And I could have fallen out of the chair, because I thought, that's one time I thought, there's no way did I hear that right.
The property along the Catawba River includes the site of an ancestral village.
I'm so excited about the exploration of the property. There's no telling what will be found. So it's sort of like getting to unwrap a package little by little. And so we're really, really excited about that.
And excited about doing it themselves.
I'm really tired of people doing things for us and about us, but without us. So the fact that the land is coming to us makes it very important.
This is the first time in Kataba's history that the state of South Carolina has given land to the tribe. Their own land, it's the tribe's land, but this is the first time that the state of South Carolina has given it back to the tribe, no strings attached. The state did the right thing. And I hope that other states throughout the country sees what the state of South Carolina did and does that for their tribes in their state.
Stuart Huntington, ICT News.
3 coastal tribes will receive funding this month to offset the effects of climate change in their regions. The Makah Tribe in Washington, the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians in California, and the Penobscot Nation in Maine will be awarded between $200,000 and $290,000 each. The funding comes from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the U.S. Department of Commerce, which will be used to manage ocean and coastal problems and increase tribal partnerships. The money will allow the tribes to hire staff, attend meetings with state and federal governments, and incorporate their traditional ecological knowledge into infrastructure planning on the coast and in oceans.
Oh, say, can you see?
Well, millions watching on TV were exposed to Native representation on Monday night at the 2024 NCAA Men's National Championship game. Navajo singer, actress, and model Kahara Hodges performed the national anthem wearing a dress from the Northern Cheyenne and Crow designer Bethany Yellowtail. The presentation of the colors was provided by veterans from the Tohono Nation Color Guard. Also featured were flags from Arizona's 22 tribal nations, carried by Native American college students and alumni from the state's institutions. Many of the students wore traditional regalia as the Native veterans saluted during the national anthem. Many noticed and celebrated the move by the NCAA on social media, saying they were proud that Native people were honored on their homelands. As the best of the best have competed for national college basketball titles, a Native American D1 coach is sharing in a celebration of his own. From the University of Houston men's basketball, Kelvin Sampson has been named Coach of the Year by the Associated Press. This is the second time Sampson has won this award, receiving 23 of 62 votes from the national panel that weighed in ahead of the NCAA March Madness tournament. The 68-year-old Lumbee coach from North Carolina led Houston to a 32-win season, a Big 12 title, and a Sweet 16 appearance this year. On this week's IndigiPolitics, we talk about the latest with tribal gaming. Regular contributor John Tahsuda is at this year's Indian Gaming Convention and Trade Show. He'll talk about this with ICT political correspondent Pauly Denetclaw, and John is a principal with Navigators Global.
Welcome back to the newscast, John.
Thanks for having me. It's a good time to be in sunny South California.
So before we get into our conversation, I really wanted folks at home to learn a little bit more about the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. And so I was wondering if you could give us the history and what rights this act gives to tribes.
Certainly. So again, and in some ways, really appropriate that we're here in Southern California because the Supreme Court case that confirmed the tribal authority to do this came out of Southern California. The Cabazon Band of Mission Indians was the sort of lead tribe in the case, but there were a number of others, including Morongo, Borona, and other tribes that were sort of in litigation with the state at the same time. But it sort of moved. Previously had been in Florida as sort of the locus of litigation, and had moved to Southern California. And that was the case that ultimately went up to the Supreme Court. And there the court said that in this case, bingo, which is what the primary gaming offering at the time was by the tribes, high stakes bingo, was something that the tribes could offer without state regulation, without the influence of the state. And it was an interesting case because they really just followed prior precedent that dealt with this law called Public Law 280, which had been passed during the termination period, and it gave the states criminal jurisdiction over tribes. But the Supreme Court later on had said it didn't give the states civil regulatory jurisdiction over the tribes. And so in some ways, Cabazon really just confirmed that prior precedent. But because of the excitement around gaming activities, even high stakes bingo, which we think of as pretty tame these days, but that was still, something that the state was really invested in trying to prevent. And so it was a big victory for the tribes, and really led to a year later, which is lightning speed in terms of congressional action. So it tells you how much people were interested in this at the time. A year later, in 1988, they passed the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which in many ways just took the rationale that the court had laid out and implemented that into statutory law. And so, and the one effect of that was because there was open questions after the Supreme Court case, since it had happened in a PL 280 state, what would be the status of the law in states that weren't governed by PL 280 and the tribes that are there, et cetera. And so the statute just sort of leveled the playing field for all the tribes in all the states to sort of establish a national standard for what the authorities were and how tribes could offer gaming.
And John, I just learned this last year, but the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act actually defines what tribes can use their gaming profits for. So can you tell us a little bit about how tribes can utilize their gaming profits?
Certainly. One of the things that the statute did that sort of went a step beyond what the Supreme Court had talked about was the use of the revenue funds from gaming. And in part of the analysis that the tribes put forward was that this revenue was vitally important to the operation of their tribal governments. And that was part of the tribal interest that the Supreme Court thought was really, really important and sort of weighed heavily in their favor in that Cabazon case. And so the Congress kind of pulled that into the statute. Again, going beyond what the Supreme Court had said, but in doing that, they really said, in essence, that these funds, this revenue funds from tribal gaming, should really be focused on tribal governments. And so there are sort of 5 broad categories that the money can be used for, but primarily they're looking at supporting tribal governments and letting tribal governments help support other local governments in case, the impacts of tribal gaming impact, law enforcement, emergency services, those kind of things. So that was the intent of it. One thing that people focus on a lot is revenue sharing with the states. And that is something that really wasn't part of that original drafting, and still is not, but it has been incorporated into how these Class 3 compacts are negotiated. So, you can look at it as a way that the states are siphoning off tribal funds, which seems not consistent with the intents of IGRA. But at the same time, it does sort of go along this same sort of vein of it's supporting government operations, the tribal government, and then their interactions with the state. And so those are sort of the focus that really people need to do. When you look at the tribal government, there's really broad uses they can do it for: healthcare, roads, almost anything, as long as it goes through the tribal government.
And you're at the Indian Gaming Association convention and trade show right now. Can you tell us a little bit if you've heard of anything that is noteworthy, issues that are happening, cases that are happening with tribal gaming?
Certainly. So I would just note that 25 years ago, I started working with the National Indian Game, what was then called the National Indian Gaming Association. And we were celebrating then what we thought were huge increases in the industry, from 15 billion to 16 billion, and in a few years it passed 20, it's now past 20 billion. So in 25 years, it has doubled in size. And that's really, amazing in the sense you think this is not doubling in size from 100 million to 200 million, but 20 billion to 40 billion. I mean, that's a major industry by any standards in our country. So that's a testament to the tribe's acumen, their success, and their ability to build relationships with the local communities. Many of the tribal operations are very dependent upon having great relationships with local governments, which is a huge turnaround, as those of us know from tribal history. Oftentimes, historically, they fought with the local governments, but now they've become much more cooperative. And that's been one of the great side benefits, I think, of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act.
And are there any legal cases that tribal leaders or those interested in following Indian gaming should keep their eye on?
Well, there is. There's been for several years now running litigation coming out of Florida dealing with sports wagering and really, but getting more to the essence of mobile gaming. We used to call it online, but now since everything's on a phone, we call it mobile gaming. And so there's a lot of focus on that. And it's partly driven by just the industry itself. As an industry matures, right, you look for new ways to operate, new ways to make revenue. And as mobile sort of lifestyles have become a big part of American culture, tribes, and not just tribes, but, the commercial gaming industry has looked to try to be a part of that. But then that runs sort of headlong into IGRA, which is, a 1988 piece of legislation. There was no internet in 1988, much less mobile, gaming, et cetera. So the principles that are outlined in IGRA are really focused on sort of on the ground operations. And when you move it to mobile devices, there's a lot of questions there. So this litigation in Florida is really focused around that. And again, the tribe, the Seminole tribe in Florida, has a great relationship with the state and their local governments. And so they had worked out this deal, but of course, commercial interests, that want to be part of that, money-making endeavor, have sued over that. So it's really sort of a private litigation versus government action. And in this point, it's a joint action by the tribe and the state. So that's really been a lot of focus. People are anxiously looking to see where that ends up, so that they can sort of further plan out how they want to proceed. So that's probably the largest litigation piece. There has been, last year, there was a big effort in California to do a referendum around daily sports wagering and sort of the mobile aspects of that. And the tribes were not happy that The people that were pushing that referendum had included them in the talks because the tribes are trying to proceed very carefully, in light of their legal situation as well as how they can best sort of partner with their local communities and their patrons, et cetera. So they were not happy with that, and they actually opposed it, and it went down, really went down in flames in a big way. And so one of the big discussions here in Inaham and IGA this year is about that, and how can so these are big market players that brought this try to bring this referendum forward, and so they are interested in talking to the tribes now. They realize they can't proceed without them. And so that's a big topic of conversation here now. And in some ways, just like the litigation, I think people are watching how that relationship develops to see what the paths forward may be in the next few years.
Well, John, that's all the time that we have. Once again, thank you so much for joining the newscast.
Thanks. Always fun.
Last month, the Washington legislature wrapped up its session. Claudia Kauffman is a citizen of the Nez Perce Tribe and a Washington state senator. She talked to ICT's Mark Trahant about her work.
Senator Kauffman, thank you for joining us on the ICT Newscast. Tell us about this past session in the Washington legislature.
I'd like to say that being an American Indian, it provides a great honor, but it's also a great responsibility. And I work to ensure that the tribal voices are not only heard, but they're respected, they're understood. And I also work to ensure that tribes have a voice at the table, and invited tribal leaders to come to the Senate Democratic Caucus with leadership directly to meet with them to voice their priorities. And it's amazing to listen to all the tribal leaders. Washington State, we have 29 federally recognized tribes. And so it's important to have their voice at the table. And so many times it is the issues of concern are shared by so many tribes, such as salmon recovery, ensuring that we replace the culverts, looking at things around the fentanyl crisis, and ensuring that tribes have their own independence to do the things that they want to do for their communities, so that the services that they're providing have the cultural background, have the tribal values incorporated into them. So I want to start with saying, being in the leadership role, I really appreciate the opportunity to do those things. And in terms of the session itself, I do have a couple of things that we worked on the last couple of years. A lot was around the MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women. Washington State does have a task force that works to identify areas of issues for the state legislature. And those included creating a toolkit for a family who may have a missing loved one. And I can tell you, having had a missing person in our family, I know firsthand, the struggles that you have, and how you search even just for, some sign of life. And so these things are important, and ensuring that, my personal, as a senator, my requests for budget included $500,000 for the Attorney General's office to work on searching through the DNA database for missing and murdered Indigenous women, and also funding the task force for another year. And then one bill I had this year was to share information between state agencies and tribes or families around for that proof of life. And so those have been some great movements that happened around MMIW. A very large area that was high on the list was the fentanyl crisis and the opioid crisis that is happening in all of our communities. And in Washington State, American Indians have the highest fatality rate when it comes to fentanyl. And so there was a tremendous amount of investment in capital dollars for tribes to build their own behavioral health facilities. Millions of dollars went out to fund the operations of those facilities. In addition, we worked on the overall behavioral health that the American Indian Health Commission brought forward, which is a very complex and comprehensive bill that provides acknowledgement of tribal resources, tribal courts, in looking at behavioral health. And so that went through, that was very complex and comprehensive. In my role in my committees, I sit on transportation, I sit on local government, and I sit on human services. But each one I worked to always include, you need to consult the tribes on this, or you need to consult tribes on that, or please don't remove, the environmental protection review. Be sure that you look at the cultural resources that you come across in any construction project, and work with the Department of Archaeology. And so that, and it was kind of like a ongoing theme for me to always drop those amendments in.
It's been 50 years since the landmark Bolt decision, the decision that upheld treaty rights to hunt and fish in the United States. And Washington State has made incredible progress in so many areas, but in other areas there continues to be a pushback. I'm thinking about culverts and trying to get a clear passageway for fish to return to spawning grounds. Let me hear your perspective on that.
It's actually something that we discussed in our caucus meeting. Last year and this year, the state put in a tremendous amount of dollars into culvert replacement. It's significantly higher than had ever been before. And there was some question about how long are we going to be doing these culverts. We've been doing them for years. And so I spoke up and I said, it's been 50 years since the Bolt decision. And there are some obligations that the state has. And I don't know, 5 or 7 times it's been taken all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And each time Washington does that, Washington loses. And so what you need to do is really put in that investment and stay on schedule. So it's not a reflection on anyone else. It's a reflection on what the state has and hasn't done.
Senator Kaufman, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity. It's great to see you, Mark.
Arabe tuat tavai, which is Ute for today is a good day. Arabe is today, tuat is good, and tavai is day. Arabe tuat tavai, which is Ute for today is a good day.
Indigenous communities are taking bold steps to bring power to their people through financial literacy. The hope is that money management becomes a skill that is passed down through generations. Reporter Lily Meskers delves into what one organization is doing to change Indigenous financial statistics.
According to a national study, Native Americans have the lowest financial literacy out of all races in the U.S. A Native Health Center in Montana is trying to change those statistics by offering free classes in financial literacy.
I have a lot of family members that struggle financially. I struggled financially growing up.
Northern Cheyenne member Michaela Richards says that there's a stigma around finances in her community.
I think that it's something that we don't really talk about in our families. Money is just not something you talk about. It's more of like a hush hush or we don't have anything, so let's just not talk about it.
So we are here tonight to talk to you guys about budgeting.
Financial professors explain the key tips of budgeting in the class meant to boost financial literacy in the Native American community. The lessons in this class consisted of interactive spreadsheets. Attendees broke down their personal finances and learned more about where they are spending their money.
You say, I am saving for XYZ to then put that money aside.
Richard says it's more important than ever to learn finance skills and to talk about them.
I think it's just, we're the new generation. And I think that having these skills that we can pass on and talking about money freely and not being so quiet about it and having like legit conversations and having professionals teach you, because that's the first step, is being like, oh, I need help.
The professionals in this class shared the SMART approach to budgeting. Setting SMART goals means setting goals that are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and timely.
Being financially prepared for the world it's an invaluable skill.
Attendees left this class equipped with the tools to begin having financial discussions at home and in their communities. Reporting for ICT Newscast from the homelands of the Salish and the Kalispel people, I'm Lily Meskers with the University of Montana School of Journalism.
What great tips there. That is a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit us at ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.